Hello again. Welcome back to the Money Corner. I'd like you to watch the show. I'd like you to stay with me for a half hour because the show is going to be very interesting. The topic is interesting, my guest is interesting, and you're going to learn a lot. My guest is Jim Hughes, who is director, now let me get this right, of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority.
You got it.
I hit it right on the button, Jim?
You got it, Phil.
Jim is a resident of Princeton, New Jersey. Thank you for coming to Bergen County. It's a long trip up for you. Jim is director, or executive director, of the authority. The authority is an agency of the state of New Jersey.
That's correct.
However, Jim is a director of an agency which has its own board of directors. So Jim technically is not an employee of the state of New Jersey, rather he is an employee of the agency. Now the agency has an important role in our economic life. The agency issues bonds or issues tax-free bonds for economic development. Jim, would you accept that as a definition? And would you like to elaborate on it?
There's a lot more to it than that.
Briefly give us the other things.
Well, our most popular, I guess, and successful tool has been issuing bonds for economic development for private industry. The bonds are issued through us. They're not obligations of the state or of the authority. They're the obligation of the user of the bond. They're issued through us to give it a tax-exempt
Jim,
status.
just by way of helping our viewer understand your function a little better, you issue bonds. Could you name a couple projects in the northern New Jersey area or the Bergen County area that you have financed or helped get on the road?
Well, sure. We've done, incidentally, in Bergen County alone, we've done just under $1 billion worth of bonds for a little under 600 projects.
Over a period of years?
Over a period of 15 years since the authority started in 1974. We should note we are the largest financing authority in the United States of our nature. Our total financing is about $7.5 billion. So you say to pick a few out, that's a tough thing to do.
Okay. Jim, I'm going to try and get an overview, and then we're going to come back into details. I know that you recently traveled to Russia.
Yes, sir.
And the purpose of a trip like that to Russia was to do what?
Well, I was part of the state trade mission, actually, and our authority, being a financing authority, has helped finance many companies in New Jersey. We also have an export financing program as part of our direct loan, not part of our bond issuing activities. And I know we're going to come back and talk about other things we do.
If you're going to finance an export activity, in effect you've got a local manufacturer who might be capable of shipping large amounts of material to another country.
Right.
And you would give them the credit, you would give them the monetary underpinning that would enable them to carry out that function.
Yeah, we function just like a bank. We don't compete with the banks, incidentally. In a function like that, we only go in where the banks won't or can't for whatever reason. But the state of New Jersey sponsored 8 or 10 companies in a booth over there at a USA exposition, which had many of the Fortune 500 companies.
In Moscow?
In Moscow, that's correct. Yes, sir.
Now, in effect, then, the Russians had an opportunity to see American merchandise.
Correct.
And the Russians, if they had the hard dollars to pay for it, would order or import that material into Russia.
That's correct, Phil. And that's the problem. They don't have the hard dollars to pay for it, but that's a different discussion.
Mm-hmm. And that's a discussion that is a little outside of the purview or the ability of the state of New Jersey to influence, or not really?
Well, it's, I guess, outside our purview to influence, but certainly the encouragement of the international trade, which was what this was all about. Mm-hmm. And that's why we sponsored, the state sponsored 8 or 10 companies to go over there. Some of those companies had been financed by the New Jersey Economic Development Authority years ago.
Jim, I know I don't want to get you into too many digressions.
Good.
I just heard recently that, for example, Wisconsin, I believe one of the Midwestern states, their major markets now for export is Japan, and they've got trade missions in Japan actively developing that relationship. The state of New Jersey is doing the same thing. We're out on the international scene trying to stimulate New Jersey business here by foreign nations.
The state of New Jersey has an office in Tokyo, as a matter of fact.
We do.
And I was on a trade mission some years ago to Tokyo, Japan, and Korea, seeking reverse investment. Mm-hmm. In Russia, that's kind of academic at this point. There's not going to be much reverse investment. Mm-hmm. But in Korea and Japan, we were over there and very successfully attracting industry to come here and build. Our authority, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, financed the first Korean manufacturing plant in the United States.
Where was it?
In Warren County.
In Warren County.
This was a Samsung electronics company. We floated a $10 million bond issue so they could build a factory for TV sets or whatever. I mean, the Koreans are now manufacturing in New Jersey.
Yeah. Jim, you're interesting as a personality in the sense that I know that you were recruited for your job by Brendan Byrne.
Correct.
Which was back 15 years or so.
Well, I've only been there a little, about 8.5 years. The
Okay.
authority's 15 years old.
Okay,
He
but-
started the authority at 15
All right.
years ago.
Now, you served under Byrne, and then you served under his successor,
Correct.
who was a Republican, Kane.
Correct.
Uh-huh. And you serve at the pleasure of your board, so you're somewhat detached from the political process
That's correct.
as an individual.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, as the executive director, you have a responsibility. For example, here in Bergen County, we have people who probably have a business operation that needs seed capital or needs capital for development or expansion. Your agency, in effect, really scouts for good places to place their money. Is that a accurate
Well, that's
description?
partially accurate, Phil. I think let's distinguish, first of all, what we do versus what some other... There is some some confusion over this. There is a New Jersey Department of Commerce
Okay.
who very effectively scouts, who very effectively retains industry. They are in charge of international trade.
Are you closely allied with
We're
them?
very closely allied with them. The Commissioner of Commerce is ex officio chairman of our board. Even though we're an independent authority, he is, by the nature of his job, our chairman. We work very closely with him all the time. But if a call comes in, it frequently happens, it'll come to me. So I'm going to say, I'm thinking of moving to New Jersey, or give me some reasons why I should stay in New Jersey, or whatever. We send them to the Department of Commerce. That's where you should go. They will give you all sorts of advantages that New Jersey has. The travel and tourism is under them, things like that. They can tell you about local sites. They have a site selection facility and all sorts of wonderful things to tell you how great New Jersey is.
Well, let's get this potential borrower of money into your department.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
What is he or she? Neutral gender now.
Right.
It.
Well, sooner or later, most companies, not all, sooner or later they'll get to the critical point where they'll say, fine, I'm sold on staying or coming or moving to New Jersey. Where do I get the money? That's when we get into
Well,
the
one thing they could do is go to their bank.
They can, they'll have to go to their bank sooner or later,
Okay.
or their normal financing institution. If the project is qualified for a tax-free bond, an industrial development
How
bond.
does a project get qualified?
Well, the
for
IRS
tax-free?
code is rather specific, and as most people know, the restrictions have been getting more and more so on this kind of financing.
Years ago, 10 years ago in Congress, before tax reformation, the ability of states and individual companies like a utility or an oil company to jointly float a tax-free bond was rather liberal and wide open.
Yeah.
That was severely restricted, I believe, under the Tax Reformation Act of '86.
Well, long before that, Phil, the Tax Reform Act of '86 was perhaps the straw that almost broke the camel's back.
But
It's not
Congress
broken yet.
viewed this joint affiliation as kind of an abuse of the tax-free issue, the tax-free ability.
There were accusations of abuse, and there were
Okay.
probably some isolated instances where it may have been abused. The projects that used to be eligible could include commercial and speculative office buildings and warehouses and all sorts of things like that.
We have a major motel or hotel in Tenafly that I know is financed with with your agency.
It's quite possible. It's quite possible. And those restrictions are such that that kind of project's no longer eligible.
Okay. Fast food.
No longer eligible.
Okay.
For a tax-free bond financing.
Now, who is still eligible then?
All right. The things that were not affected at all, but have always been eligible and continue to be eligible, are 501c3 corporations.
What is that? What is a 501c3?
It's a not-for-profit corporation. We are are financing.
Well, that could be a hospital.
It could be a hospital. There is a separate entity in New Jersey that.
Oh, the healthcare agency.
The healthcare. They do
Okay.
hospitals. We don't.
Okay.
We don't do residential. There's another agency for that.
Who else could be a not-for-profit?
We are financing right now the YMCA, YMHA of Bergen County.
Really?
We're financing
I
that
see.
project right now.
Uh-huh.
That sort of thing. Secondary schools. We have financed some secondary schools. We have financed homes for the retarded, not in residential homes, facilities to treat those kind of people. We're financing some continuing care retirement facilities.
Let me pick up just very quickly the school, the secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
A school ordinarily can be financed through the bonding ability of the municipality.
Public
Unless,
school. Public school.
I see,
Public
like
school.
a private school
Private
is what
school,
you're talking
private
about.
school, private
In
school.
Englewood, we've got the Dwight Englewood School.
We could finance that.
I
That
see,
does not happen
I
to be
see.
one on our
Or
agenda
one
now,
of
but
the-
there are others.
I
Yeah.
got it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, let me, if I may refer to my notes. We
Yeah.
talked about the W-H-A of Bergen County.
Where are they located?
They're in Washington Township.
Oh, I know that facility.
Pascock Road.
Yeah, that's a beautiful facility.
We just recently, actually, a while ago, closed on an $11.5 million bond issue. It was floated by an investment banking firm in New York. And this was the 501c3 not-profit providing cultural
that
$11.5
million, in effect, you have a bond issue out there now. That $11.5 million is an obligation of the agency,
No.
or of the facility. It's an obligation of who?
Of the user.
Yeah, I mean that, of the
I'm
Y.
Sorry, you said the agency. I thought you meant us.
meant
Yeah.
of the Y.
Of the Y,
correct?
that's correct. That's
Okay.
correct,
In effect, the Y hits economic problems and defaults. Who picks up the marbles?
The bondholder. The bondholder.
The bondholder.
There is no obligation on the part of the state or the authority.
So the only thing that
Assume
you've done
responsibility.
is bring the tax-free ability
Correct.
to the bond, which gives it a competitive advantage out in the state.
Yeah.
Do your bonds have a rating?
Some do, some don't. That depends on how they're sold, Phil. It's not always necessary. Most of our bonds, now this is a pretty good-sized issue, incidentally.
And did that have a rating?
I don't know.
Uh-huh.
It's not here. It depends how, again, it was placed. Most of our bonds are placed privately with a local institution.
I see.
And they don't need a rating. They do their own
Right.
credit analysis. They determine whether they want it or not. This bond was underwritten by a Wall Street firm. Whether they placed it privately or sold it to the public, I don't have.
Are you restricted from telling us who the firm is, just by way
The
of...
Wall Street firm,
Yeah.
Ehrlich Bober and Company.
I don't... Okay.
Yeah, which we do not select. Again,
I
the
understand
user
that.
comes in and selects their own investment banker, their own bond counsel from a selected list, and because they're paying all the fees. We are just the conduit. Now, this facility has a tax-free status to begin with. We didn't have to give them a tax-free status. We merely furnishing the financing vehicle. Now, we were talking about this kind of facility project is eligible and will be eligible in the foreseeable future. There are certain other exempt activities which are defined as water distribution, gas transmission, docks, wharves, airports, those sorts of things.
Now, those could be for-profit companies.
They could be, and they are. We have done financing for Hackensack Water Company.
Okay, so there are companies still available, or entities on the list that are profit-making entrepreneurial companies.
That's correct. That is correct.
Okay.
And will be eligible. We were talking about tax reform.
Yeah.
Now, refundings are still eligible. The company wants to refinance some previously issued
Jim,
bonds.
you're using a term the viewer may not be familiar with. The refunding is...
Refinancing. Refinancing of an existing bond debt. We cannot refinance another kind of financing. I'm aware we're getting into technical areas here, which you and I understand. But if someone has a previously existing industrial development bond out, they can refinance or refund with minor restrictions. Those are still eligible, the exempt activities. But the common one, I guess, Phil, where we're getting down is what is the Tax Reform Act of '86 restricted in the normal course of business, everything but manufacturing facilities. No more commercial, no more retail, no more speculative office buildings. Manufacturing, and that's fairly clearly defined.
Right. We're going to be back, Jim, we're going to take a break. We're going to be back in just a moment. We'll show you some pictures of actual projects the authority has been financing. So stay with us and we'll continue our discussion with Jim Hughes. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. My guest is Jim Hughes, and Jim is director of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. The authority has a responsibility for, in effect, stimulating our economy, bringing new business into Jersey, helping homemade or contemporary businesses grow in the state of New Jersey. Jim, before you get into specifics of some of the projects that you've underwritten and that you've helped develop, tell us a little about the authority in terms of its contribution to the overall American economic model. And let me clarify my question for a moment. One of the things, as we listen to Gorbachev and we listen to the interface or the dialogue between Gorbachev and Bush, you hear Gorbachev and his colleagues acknowledging that they are not in a market-oriented economy. They don't have the mechanism for being there yet. One of the things that's impressed me about the Japanese economy, which has been the success game of the century, is their ability to coordinate government and the private sector with a lending capacity which has enabled them to do market development, product development, and really go out and fight an aggressive economic war. Now, in effect, you're kind of a blend between the private sector and the public sector, and you have this germination capacity or seed planting capacity to help the economy grow. And as I think about your function, I think back during the New Deal era, the Roosevelt era, we had TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yep.
Is there a historical kind of evolutionary relationship that you are now the product of and the success of?
Well, I think your public-private reference is a good one. I think we're kind of represent what can happen when it's done right.
You're hybrid.
Exactly. We are a private-public partnership. We operate under the auspices of a public entity, which is the state government, and we're a lesser creature of that, but we are a creature of the state, which gives us certain powers, certain tax-exempt powers, certain powers to condemn, certain powers to do certain things. But nevertheless, the money basically comes from the private side of the equation. There was some state money that flowed into the authority back in its early days. We've been able to leverage this. We've been able to build on it. We've been able to stimulate private investment, thereby making the authority profitable and able to continue to do more things. You know, you mentioned, we discussed Russia a few minutes ago. One thing that struck me when we were over there not too long ago was constantly they're discussing the need for joint ventures with American companies and Russian companies. We ran into several people. I said, well, what does your husband do or your wife do, whatever the case may be? Several of them said, well, he or she is with a new commission. I said, what's a new commission? Well, it's a private-public partnership, even in Russia. They're starting to go this way. I said, how are they funded? Well, it's a partly donation. It was kind of vague because they're still feeling their way. But it seems to be that they're learning a lot from this private-public partnership, which we've been able to develop so successfully here.
And there's no question but the Japanese have incorporated this into their role very successfully, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Jim, I know that you brought a number of pictures which dramatize or illustrate some of the projects that you've worked on, and you might want to use a reference to those pictures as illustrative of your operation.
Sure. Let's take a look at what was a typical operation a few years ago, albeit a somewhat larger one. I like this when everyone knows the name. Everyone gets warm feeling when they see the name Toys R Us. Our authority some years ago helped locate the warehouse for this area for Toys R Us in the Newark Industrial Center, which the New Jersey Economic Development Authority developed. The Toys R Us, through a $10 million bond financing of the authority, was able to construct a 300,000 square foot plus regional distribution center on 23 acres. The authority some years earlier had bought 88 acres in Newark, acting as principal. We developed it. We sold 23 acres to Toys R Us.
So you were a landlord?
We were a landlord, short-term landlord. Our objective over the years has been to get in, fix things up, and get out.
Are you out of that now?
We're out.
You're out.
We're gone.
And everything is now in the hands of private people?
Everything is in the hands of private people.
Does Toys R Us now own the land and the building there?
Correct. That is correct.
And they really secured the land and the building at a cheaper financing cost than if they had done it privately?
That is correct. That is correct. And we make the case that without our assistance, that warehouse would not have been built in that site at that time in that magnitude.
Show us another project that would be of interest to you.
The next project that I'd like to talk about is a company called Corporate Knitting, which is in Passaic County. This is a different kind of financing we do, and I'd like to, we've talked a lot about bonds and typical bonds. I said earlier, Toys R Us is not qualified anymore because it's a warehouse. We can only do manufacturing. But the authority has been diversifying over the years. We knew these restrictions were coming, and we've been getting into other areas. For example, we run a direct loan program. Corporate Knitting was able to benefit from our direct loan program. In 1987, the end of the year, we closed a $500,000 loan directly from the authority. The authority has its own resources in which it can lend money. Corporate Knitting is a manufacturer of ladies' sweaters.
What is the length, the maturity of that loan?
That was a $500,000 loan for 10 years.
For 10 years.
Yeah, that is our maximum direct loan, both in maturity and amount.
So there you were collecting interest on the money that you had out in the field.
That is correct.
Now that was that a tax-free loan?
Well, it's our loan, so it doesn't matter. In this case, the company had gone to their bank. For whatever reason, the bank was unwilling or unable to make that loan. We require the applicant to go to their bank first. We're not trying to take business away from the bank.
You don't want to knock the private segment out.
We are very good partnership with the bank, exactly. And our loans are made at well under bank rates, which sometimes in itself makes a project feasible.
Show us another case history, just so that I know time is running along, and I want to hit all of them.
Well, another one, and that was a $500,000 loan, which is our maximum loan for fixed assets, up to 10 years. We also have a small loan program called the Urban Center Small Loan Program. This project, My Florist, which is, it's not My Florist, it's his florist, but the name of the project's My Florist, in Jersey City in Hudson County. In 1982,
Is this a retail operation?
Yes, it's a $30,000 loan we made. to renovate a Jersey City building, enabling this company to expand their flower shop business. It's a flourishing retail operation. The loan has been paid off, I might
What
add.
year did you give them that loan?
1982.
And that's worked well.
It not only worked well, the loan's been paid.
Do you think that that florist could come back to you again, or if he's too successful now, you probably would send him to his bank?
Exactly.
I see.
We hope he goes to his bank.
Right. Okay,
We're only there to do the things the banks won't or can't
Let's
do.
go on to the next case history.
Sure. What I'd like to talk about, Phil, for a minute is to some of the other areas. We've talked about bonds. We've talked about authority direct loans from our own resources. If a bond isn't applicable, those projects which cannot be used for bonds now, commercial, my florist could not use a bond, but wouldn't use it anyway, it was too small. But we have programs within the authority of our own. We also have, we didn't mention, a guarantee program. You asked earlier about, is it a general obligation of the state or the authority? The answer is no. If a project cannot be sold without our guarantee, then we will consider it. The authority has the power and the resources to guarantee certain bonds, up to $1.5 million for a fixed asset and up to $1 million for working capital, up to 90%. That's not a general obligation of the state or the authority, but it is pledged against it certain designated funds, so that'll make it happen. Now, I would like to talk about our industrial real estate program. This particular project is the Airport Industrial Center. It's in Newark. It's one of two projects. Toys R Us is in the other one that we accomplished. We bought this property in 1985. We included in the cost was the acquisition. I'm sorry, including the acquisition and improvement cost, total $3.6 million. We bought 15 acres, 400,000 square foot of usable space, and we have to date generated $13 million in private investment and over 1,000 jobs. There are 8 tenants in this building. Some of them are listed there. Some of them we've financed. We've developed similar centers in Jersey City and Elizabeth. We're working now in some new aspects of real estate development. We have been selected by the state to develop a $100 million office complex in downtown Trenton.
But Jim, these projects are not just random. The state has a vested interest. They want to build up particularly urban areas that may be in the throes of the decline.
Correct.
They want to wipe out decay.
Mm-hmm.
Can the local municipality come to you? Can an entrepreneur come to you, or do you go out seeking them? How do you put the parties together?
All of the above. The parks are usually brought to us by the municipality, the council or the mayor or the development people, whoever. They will come to us and they say, we have a tract of land. Newark had 88 acres out near the airport. It was the other site, not this one. And that had been there for years. I mean, it was not officially blighted, but basically it was blighted area.
Or it was underutilized.
Underutilized, that's a good word. And in that case, there was one tenant on the property, and it was just going nowhere. And they said to us that we'd like to get together. In this case, Newark put up some money. The U.S. government put up some money, and we put in the rest. We took ownership of the property. We built it, and the rest is history. Our idea is to get in and get out as short-term developers.
Jim, how do you coordinate? You mentioned that you had coordinated with Newark municipality, the federal government, the feds. Mm-hmm. So in effect, you've got a good alliances out there to mobilize capital and create an underwriting pool, just as a combination of banks would.
Well, that's one reason we can do what private industry won't. Again, if private industry had shown a willingness to develop this site, we would have walked away, which we've done on occasion. But private industry cannot usually go into partnership with all these government entities, and we're able to pull it together and act as the catalyst to make these things happen. So that we've been able to fulfill that but-for requirement again. But our trend recently has been more toward a longer-term development. We're getting away. That's not right. We're not getting away from, but we're getting into new areas, such as the Trenton office complex I referred to. The Newark Performing Arts Center, we have been asked by the state to help assemble the land site, package it, and turn it over to the
Now,
private
by assembling the
developers.
land site, then, are you going to be the acquirer? Are you
Yes.
going to put your funds in?
Yes.
You're going to buy some property. You're going to hold property.
Correct. In the case of the Newark Arts Center, it will not be our funds. It will be our bond issue, but it will be backed by a state lease or a state appropriation of some sort. But we will be the owner on a temporary basis.
I remember in the Carter years, I think Carter started articulating the urban renewal and the urban core, getting the South Bronx, symbolically, the South Bronxes of the United States back and make them economically viable. Reagan talked a great deal about this, the urban rejuvenation.
Yes.
Is this a part of your operation now? Or are we starting to see the fulfillment of that now?
I think
Is there
I
a
think we are.
continuity down through the decades?
There certainly is, Phil, and a lot of what we are doing now started back in those days. There were a lot of U.S. funds flowing in those days.
Which, by and large, are not available today.
Exactly, but back in the Carter days, I mean, our authority was a happy recipient back in the late 70s of funds from the administration in Washington then, which flowed through our authority. $13 million loan to the Okanite Company through our authority. As the loan's repaid, we keep it. We've been able to recycle it. That's the origin of a lot of the monies that we have. I do want to mention one other program because there are still federal funds involved in this one of the few. It's called the Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. Our authority acts with a contractual relationship with the U.S. Department of Commerce to assist companies impacted by imports. Those companies that can prove that their sales, production, employment have been affected by imports of whatever kind from wherever can come to us, and we can get them certified and work with them in getting consultants and financial assistance. That is still a U.S. funded program. It's the only thing we do that's U.S. funded, and we happen to do it for the state of New Jersey.
That's very good. Well, Jim, we're just about out of time. We're coming to the end. I'm going to start getting a signal from the cameraman. I wish you would come back again. There's a magnitude here which goes from urban rejuvenation of municipalities in the United States to going out and becoming a global participant in terms of bringing foreign business here and sending our business overseas. So thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed having you with me, and I'll be back on the Money Corner very soon. Be tuned in next week, and I'll see you soon again on the Money Corner. Good night.